I have the honor to welcome you today to the special CF colloquium we co-organized between the Development of Geography and the Environmental Governance Research Group from Professor Jessica Batz, together with the working group from Eva Jukana and Carolina Toulon. My name is Ann-Kathrin Vollmer and I'm from the Department of Geography. I'm delighted to present our guest researcher who is visiting us for 2 weeks at the Institute of Geography, Professor Denisse Roca-Servat from the University of Antioquia in Colombia. She holds a PhD in Justice Studies from the Arizona State University and is currently a professor at the University of Antioquia in Colombia. Her research focuses on political ecology, water justice, decolonial theories, and ecofeminism. She founded the Group for the Study of Political Ecology and Water Justice, where she explores alternatives to extractivism and Latin American environmental thought. So I am really welcoming you, and I'm really curious about your talk about becoming river, intersecting decolonial, feminist, and cosmopolitical hydrosocial relations. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm happy to be here with you all. Thank you for the invitation to share with you some reflections from my research work on environmental and water justice in Latin America and the Caribbean. So what I'm going to present to you today is research that has been conducted in collaboration with various peoples, both within and outside academia, environmental activists, and water defenders. I draw from 20 years of experience conducting ethnographic and action research in countries like Peru, Colombia, Honduras, Puerto Rico, and the United States, through an interdisciplinary lens that combines political ecology, feminist geography, and science and technology studies, as well as situated and local knowledge from Latin America and the Caribbean through participatory social cartographies and artistic and visual-based methodologies. My great-grandfather was a fisherman. I never knew him personally, but I was shown pictures of him, sailing boats, cruising the waves of intercontinental seas. I imagine myself like him, but as a woman navigator, free, with the wind roughing my hair, the swaying of the sea, the sound of seagulls, whales circling, and the stars. That's why, when for the first time I saw the sea light up in the darkness of the night, in the Mosquito Bay, on the Caribbean island of Vieques, I felt as if that body of water was trying to tell me something. What was it trying to tell me? What would happen if we could know the memories and the stories of water? Thus, with water as a protagonist, I would like to begin this conversation by briefly discussing its composition. First, I will explore the conceptual framework, thinking with water, alternative social, hydrosocial relations. Second, I will share some real-life stories of eco-territorial movements, resisting and re-existing. And finally, I will address decolonial, feminist, and cosmopolitical proposal of becoming river. We find water at the heart of the struggle for life. Like waves flowing with the echo of water, we see practices and relationships that reproduce life amid threats and processes of extraction. How does thinking with water allow us to envision alternatives to the extractivist model? Rivers as bodies of waters are dynamic, ever reconfiguring relations of entanglement of multiple flows, subterranean waters, river beds, and their tributaries and creeks, air flows, wind, trees, grass, fauna, people, transportation, infrastructure, construction, sounds, thoughts, emotion, games, everyday practices. Presence as much as absence of water makes a complex fractal network and the ecosystem of life. Rivers relate to humans and tell multiple stories and offer complex ways of relating. A river is a contact zone, as Donna Haraway would put it, a zone constituted by and in our relations to each other, in terms of co-presence, interaction, interlocking, understandings, and practices, often within radically asymmetrical relations of power. It brings to the surface relations of power the same way it can reveal minerals accumulated for centuries at its bottom. It also proposes the ways of achieving balance. Contact zones are not limited to the physical terrain. They can also imply affects, lines of thoughts that come out with a more than human contact. How can we think with or evaluate the enacting of a river? Thinking with water teaches us not to separate. It shows us the interdependence and the inseparability of ways of being, ontology, of ways of knowing, epistemology, and ways of doing, practice, combined with the need for a non-hierarchical, undulating, and complex approach. In this way, thinking with water allows us to decolonize our relationship with, to make more visible existing hydrosocial relations and others that we can materialize to reproduce life. Combining post-humanist feminism and political ecology of water, I understand water as natural cultural. That is, it is almost impossible to identify the dividing line between water and culture, where non-human bodies of water territories end, and where human bodies of water begin, as well as where natural forces govern and human beings submit, or vice versa. Similarly, the materiality of water is so diverse that it leads us to think about multiple forms of waters and the diverse normative systems in which they are organized. The way we understand water will give rise to a series of practices of interrelation that in the long run construct territorial landscapes, particular territorialities, and or bodies in constant tension and transformation. Understanding water following Astrida Neimanis as a medium that generates aqueous relations, that is, relations that are not only social, but more than human, including the multiplicity of forms of water itself. On the one hand, relations surrounding water give rise to an understanding of how different human groups have positioned themselves different throughout history regarding the state, regarding law, regarding property, regarding capitalism, regarding land, etc. This includes the different networks of relations that water produces, interweaving aesthetic, cultural, political, economic, social, and biophysical aspects. But beyond the anthropocentric approach, bodies of waters form an aqueous network or a more than human hydro commons that has agency in itself. As Colombian activists Aimé Martinez Vega would say, water itself has the right to flow, to inhabit, and to exist. It can be modified over time. It is a being that, in a historical relationship without any type of species hierarchy, must be granted dignity. In that sense, water itself and its different material forms have agency and co-create the worlds. Rethinking our relationship with water requires making these other ways of conceiving and relating the commons visible. The idea of water as a common places its communal nature, its potential as an axis of social and political organization, its relational dimension as a means of guaranteeing the reproduction of life, and the opportunity to build decolonial experiences in relation to at the center of the discussion. So, in the face of a model of death materialized by neoliberal capitalist logic, alternative hydrosocial relations emerge, making possible what Yamit Gonzalez, one of the founding intellectuals of the eco-territorial movement, the Western Environmental Belt in Southwest Antioquia, Colombia, calls geographical alternatives. That is, spatial practices alternative to the capitalist model, which arise from the specificities of each place and are articulated with each other, weaving a vast network of resistance. Alternative hydrosocial relationships enacted by this environmental movement in Antioquia produce multiple natures of water and forms of interrelation with the environment, and therefore enable geographical alternatives to the extractivist valuation model of the environment. By means of ethnographic research, we found at least 3 alternative hydrosocial relations. Water and territory as a relationship of collective history building. Water and food as a relationship of survival and care. Water and resistance as a relationship of seeking autonomy. Far from absolute or univocal, these relations reflect complex epistemological and ontological systems, which often interrelate and overlap. Therefore, rivers or muddy terrains as complex hybrid networks reveal ways of living in the midst of a planetary crisis and can offer creative socio-ecological care practices. From the high Andean mountains of Peru to the Magdalena River in Colombia, to the peninsular archipelago of Puerto Rico, an entanglement of hydrosocial relations is woven that unites us in multiple ways, not only with the Caribbean Sea, but also with a colonial past and a force of re-existence. I will therefore try to think with water to tell you 3 stories of resistance and re-existence, where water is an ally in the reconstruction of history, or even a geological memory of the planet. One such story is set on the island of Vieques, in what is known now as Puerto Rico. It's part of the Puerto Rican archipelago, which was called Vieque by the Taíno people who lived in the islands. These territories are currently colonized by the United States of America, particularly by the Navy and the military forces. The Vieques people have resisted several colonizations, first by the Spanish, then by the French, then by the English, and most recently by the United States. This means they cannot exercise sovereignty over their own territory. The people of Vieques have fought steadfastly and courageously for their autonomy, a struggle not without martyrs. People like David Sanes and so many other human beings and other species who have lost their lives. However, the US federal government continues to control approximately 70% of the island. Today, it is a contaminated territory. It is a sacrifice zone. However, in this place, hives are forming, wild hives, hives of women, children, gender-based dissidents, Afro-descendants, free and strong, reaffirming their capacity for self-management. They are fostering the island's food sovereignty through agroecological practices, beekeeping, and the solidarity economy. Because there is no surface water sources, only contaminated underground water, the small island depends on a marine pipeline that supplies drinking water from the main island of Puerto Rico to the small island of Vieques. In this context, women of La Colmena Cimarrona collect rainwater through a system that gathers water from a pond and several storage tanks. Bees, particularly Africanized bees, a hybrid of European and African honeybees, play an important role in this fight. These bees are known for their more aggressive behavior and their tendency to form large swarms. Like bees and with bees, the women of the Colmena cling to existence in territories not only damaged, but also considered at risk of disappearing due to climate change, water scarcity, patriarchal violence, multiple forms of dispossession, and they do so by cultivating water and give rise to understanding by cultivating water, land, collective alternatives of water sources, bringing back nutrients to the soil and healing the body and the territory. In this story, water is anti-colonial, anti-patriarchal, and even anti-state resistance. It is multi-species resistance, where farmers defend their territories and pollinate them with bees. The Caribbean as the place where the limits of capitalism, individualism, and hereditary normative model are exposed, and where queer visions of relationships between human and non-human necessary to rethink political organization around care of nature is realized. From the sea, we sail toward the rivers, to the Magdalena and the Cauca rivers in Colombia. We arrive by boat, and before navigating through its tributaries, we acknowledge their role for sustaining life in the city. Colombia is a territory that presents itself as an amphibious, where the abundance and diversity of water determine the ways of inhabiting the land and shape the culture and the character of its people. However, there is quite different understandings of what amphibious means in the urban vis-a-vis the rural areas. The two main Andean rivers, the Magdalena and the Cauca, travel through all the country from south to north and host and sustain the four most important cities of Colombia: Barranquilla, Medellín, Bogotá, and Cali. So the advancement of urbanization has displaced, buried, dammed, and polluted bodies of water. This has unfolded within a historical context where the city speaks of their rivers in mythical terms. Yet they are there, and their channels and the flows, they are cyborg rivers, Frankenstein projects. Nevertheless, they are still linked to its tributaries and to other streams of flows. So in the tributaries of the Magdalena, navigating through the tributaries, I found a small river called Samaná. Samaná is a tributary to the Magdalena. Samaná is one of the few rivers that is not dammed. And there are many collectives trying to protect this river. So we spent the night there in a riverside inn and met Daisy, a single mother who chose to return to her homeland after being displaced by the armed conflict. She converted her home into a guest house where she teaches about her love of the river, of fishing, riverside cuisine. In this area, the fishing culture is crucial as a way of life, a way of subsistence, a way of connecting with the river. The amphibious culture, as Colombian sociologist Orlando Fares Borda would say, is not limited to the fishermen, who are also women, but also to the people involved in fishing. They are peasants, women in charge of caring for and reproducing life. Women like Daisy teach us that caregiving should not be understood as in the domestic sphere, nor led solely by women. Caregiving is a shared social responsibility. She, along with her children and other family members and several animals, such as the fish endemic to these places, like the Boca Chico, and a beautiful waterfall, sustain life in this place. This implies, as Mina Lorena Navarro and Raquel Gutierrez mentioned, highlighting the relationships of interdependence and the political and collective capacities of care that are shared through daily work and activities that sustain life. Traveling through the southern Andes, we met Yolanda Flores, a woman from the Aymara nation on the border between Peru and Bolivia, a defender of the mountains and of Lake Titicaca. Yolanda proclaims that the time has come for indigenous women to exercise their right to political participation. And she said so with conviction and certainty of the implications of her words. Domestic and structural violence against women's bodies has taken a root and is reinforced by mining and energy extraction projects in her territory. As Lorena Capnal, a Maya Cinca member of the community in the feminist movement in Guatemala, states, the conscious recovery of the first body territory is a feminist political proposal that integrates the historical and daily struggle of indigenous peoples for recovering and defending their land territory, as well as their body territory, which has been violated by patriarchies for millennia. In this sense, when Yolanda protests against the implementation of large-scale mining in her territory, and her concern about pollution and the diminishing of water supply, she does so from a historical, anti-colonial, hello, yes. But perhaps more importantly, according to Aymara knowledge, mountains and water are not just mountains. They are sacred and powerful entities that represent and connect human beings with spirits. As Marisol de la Cadena points out, Andean cultures do not separate people from territory. They occur in a relational time and space They are therefore relational ontologies. So all these stories about water invite us to recover the notion of being part of an entanglement of life. How do we become river? Becoming river, therefore, implies taking into account geo-hydro-social diversity, its historical foundations, and ultimately committing to building alternative hydrosocial relations intersecting decolonial, feminist, and cosmopolitical justice approaches. From a perspective of decolonial justice, I would like to emphasize three interrelated concepts: environmental colonialism, disaster colonialism, and climate colonialism. I would like to begin by highlighting the contribution of Caribbean and subaltern thought in the identification and conceptual development of these terms. Environmental colonialism, according to José Atiles Osoria, functions as an ideological system of exploitation, operating in a planned, legally legitimized manner, with the consent of national elites, with the promise of retribution anchored in the discourse of economic development and modernization. This system of exploitation continues to reproduce oppressions based on racial and gender hierarchies. An example of this is Puerto Rico, as well as many Caribbean islands which remain under colonial legal mandates that exacerbate social inequality, inequitable access to territory, and decent and healthy environments for local populations. On the other hand, Puerto Rican scholars Yarimar Bonilla and Marisol Lebrón, as well as Daniel Zoe Rivera, propose a concept disaster colonialism, based on Naomi Klein's book on disaster capitalism. The book shows that for neoliberalism, crises become opportunities to promote reforms that would otherwise be rejected by the population, doubling down on neoliberal interventions through rapid deregulation. Can you think one related to water? There are many, many of them. Climate colonialism, for its part, relates not only to the fact that those who have contributed most to the consequences of climate change are the least exposed to its worst effects and have the greatest capacity to mitigate those consequences themselves, but also to the fact that the proposed solutions often entrench patterns of unequal social and ecological exchange, rather than resolving the problem in a globally just way. Colonial practices have transformed climate into a political tool in the hands of hegemonic groups seeking to displace historically excluded populations from their bodies, waters, territories. There is a growing body of research demonstrating how, in places such as Palestine, Oceania, the Caribbean, or in feminicized spaces, colonial practices have transformed climate into a political tool in the hands of hegemonic groups seeking to displace historically excluded populations from their bodies and territories. In this context, Farhana Sultana draws attention to the need to confront climate coloniality by reconstructing memories, as well as individual and collective consciousness for reconciliation and liberation. From a perspective of territorial feminist justice, the contributions of collectives in defense of the territory and against violence fostered by massive extractivist exploitation of nature, and the work of social reproduction and care for life are recognized. In this sense, it is crucial to analyze the effects of mining and energy extractivism on gender relations, particularly the violence directed toward women, children, the queer population, as well as the impact on relations between peasants, indigenous, Afro-descendant peoples. This is not a philosophical or an abstract perspective, but rather a situated political epistemic perspective that involves understanding the ways in which colonial imposition of Western gender inequality, as well as modern dichotomous rationality, coupled with neoliberal extractive economic regimes, deepen forms of violence against feminized bodies and territories. Many of these collectives or community in Latin America, the defenders now, many of them are women. There are women standing up trying to defend their lands and waters. But as Delmitania Cruz would say, they do not call themselves feminist, but neither are they antagonistic to feminist keys on violence, rights, and defense of territories. But they deploy anti-patriarchal community strategies. Hence, it is important to talk about community networks. That is, as Raquel Gutierrez, Lucia Linsalata, Mina Lorena Navarro would say, the diverse and polymorphous ways in which diverse human collectives strive to struggle on a daily and extraordinary basis to guarantee the material and symbolic conditions of their own reproduction through political practices. In terms of water justice, community-based territorial feminisms criticize the institutional water system, which ignores the underlying structures that produce water injustice and gender-based inequality. Consequently, territorial feminisms denounce the false solutions adopted by international institutions, which maintain measures that commodify nature and, on the other hand, perpetuate the insatiability consumption pattern of global capitalism. Finally, the cosmopolitical justice proposes an ethical and political stance that rejects three ideas interrelated to human exceptionalism. First, that humans are physically separate from other species. Second, that humans are unique because they possess consciousness and agency. Third, that humans are more important than other species. From the Belgian philosopher Isabel Stengers, but rooted in these Latin American and Caribbean water defenders, Cosmopolitics invite us to think about politics beyond the exclusively human framework. It involves recognizing that non-humans such as rivers, dams, bees, fish, infrastructures, wetlands, coconut trees, mountains, as well as alternative scientific and technological designs, can also participate in the construction of the common world through not a discursive manner, but in a materialized manner as well. Consequently, the ethics of cosmopolitical justice addresses the dynamics of oppression that intersect across human dimensions such as race, class, gender, and sexuality, as well as the more than human dimensions of inter and intra-species oppression in order to recognize, resist, and respond to violence against any type of being. All these stories about water invite us to recover the notion of being part of the entanglement of life, which, as Raquel Gutierrez would say, is not free of conflict, of contradictions, of tensions. It is even a multi-species, feminist, and anti-colonial community web that does not allow for close dichotomies. In the words of Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui, it is about doing things differently, not subsuming them to the logic of capital or the state, or to the logic of modernity, patriarchy, or even postmodern or academic trends. In this sense, we are hydro-commons with profound and inevitable differences in our trajectories, in our ways of living, in our ways of being, with contradictions and many voids, but we also share the waters of our bodies. Water teaches us about the politics of difference. We are distinct beings, but in relation, as relational ontologies. Waters have memories, and navigating the bioluminescent Mosquito Bay on the island of Vieques, I understood that in Latin America and the Caribbean, there are thousands of little fires, tracing a pluriverse founded on joyful rebellion and radical empathy. Thank you very much.